Aisha wiped the wooden table slowly, her hands moving with the same rhythm she had followed every day for the past 2 years. The clinking of glasses, the sound of spoons against plates, and the chatter of customers filled the restaurant. The air smelled of roasted chicken, buttered bread, and hot coffee, but to her, it was the same smell she had grown used to long ago. She had memorized the way the place came alive in the evenings, when the lights glowed warmly, and businessmen, students, and families filled the small but popular restaurant. She worked quietly, hardly noticed by anyone except when someone raised a hand to ask for water or another cup of tea. Most people saw her as just another waitress in a black apron and white shirt, carrying trays and smiling politely. But inside her, there was a story no one in the restaurant knew. She wasn't just a young woman serving food, she was someone who had spent countless nights bent over books, her eyes red from studying, teaching herself things that went far beyond her job. Aisha had grown up in a small town, where dreams often felt too big for the narrow streets. Her parents were simple people. Her father worked at a small shop, and her mother did stitching work at home. They wanted the best for her but could never afford expensive schools or classes. Aisha, however, had always been curious. She wanted to see the world beyond her town, and she believed that languages were the doors to that world. When she first heard English being spoken on television, she was fascinated. Later, she discovered French, Spanish, and even Japanese, and each language felt like a secret code she wanted to unlock. Without teachers or proper classes, she turned to whatever she could find. She borrowed books from old shops, watched free videos on the internet when she could, and practiced writing sentences late at night when the rest of her family was asleep. She often sat under the dim yellow light of a small lamp, whispering words to herself, trying to copy accents, and smiling when she finally got something right. Her friends sometimes laughed when she used foreign words by mistake, but she didn't care. Deep inside, she believed that one day this hidden skill would matter. But life doesn't always wait for dreams. Bills had to be paid, and her younger brother needed school fees. When her father's health began to weaken, Aisha knew she had to step in. She found a waitress job in the city, far from glamorous but steady enough to keep the house running. She promised herself that it was only temporary, just until things improved. Yet days turned into months, and months turned into years. The city taught her speed, patience, and humility. She learned how to carry 4 plates at once, how to keep smiling even when her feet ached, and how to stay polite when a customer was unkind. Still, the spark inside her never died. Whenever the restaurant had a quiet hour, she would take out a small notebook from her apron pocket. In it, she had written phrases in different languages. While other waiters chatted or checked their phones, she would whisper words under her breath, bonjour, comment allez-vous, or como estás. Sometimes, she even helped tourists who came to the restaurant, surprising them with a friendly greeting in their own language. They would smile, impressed, but most of her colleagues shrugged it off as a small trick. No one imagined how deep her knowledge really went. That evening felt like any other. The restaurant was busy, the air alive with the sound of conversations and laughter. Aisha balanced a tray with 2 bowls of soup and a glass of water. Her mind was half on her work and half somewhere far away. She often imagined what her life might look like if she had been born into a different family, one that could afford to send her abroad or at least pay for proper classes. She pictured herself working as a translator, maybe even traveling, helping people communicate across borders. She imagined walking into offices in neat clothes, her name on an ID card, her talent recognized instead of hidden. But reality called her back as a customer waved impatiently, and she quickly set down the tray with her usual polite smile. She reminded herself not to drift too far into dreams. Life was easier to handle when she focused only on the next task, the next plate, the next table. Yet, somewhere inside, she believed that destiny had a strange way of opening doors when you least expect it. That night, As she stood by the counter waiting for an order, she noticed a group of men entering the restaurant. They were dressed in expensive suits, their confident voices filling the air as they chose a corner table. She guessed they were businessmen, probably regulars at the hotel nearby. Something about their presence changed the energy in the room. Other customers glanced at them briefly, sensing their importance. Aisha didn't think much of it at first. To her, they were just another group to serve, another table to keep happy. She picked up her notepad and walked toward them with her usual calm smile. None of them paid much attention to her as they ordered quickly tea, coffee, sandwiches, and a few heavier dishes. She wrote everything neatly, thanked them, and hurried back. To her, it was another routine task. What she didn't know was that these men, and especially the man sitting at the head of the table, the CEO, would soon change the course of her life forever. The evening carried on. Orders came and went, the kitchen buzzed with noise, and the waiters rushed back and forth. But the group at the corner laughed louder than most. Aisha glanced at them occasionally as she refilled their cups. The man in the middle, tall with a confident air, seemed to be leading the conversation. He laughed often, and the others followed. They spoke about deals, meetings, and travels, words that felt like they belonged to a different world from hers. Aisha, carrying another tray, felt a small pang inside. She wondered what it would feel like to be part of such conversations, to sit at a table not as a server but as an equal. She wondered if they had ever worked late into the night without pay, or studied under a single lamp because electricity bills were too high. Probably not. Their laughter was too carefree, their voices too confident. Yet she reminded herself again not to compare. Everyone's life was different. She didn't know then that fate was preparing a test for her, a test that would come in the form of a single sheet of paper, a joke, and a challenge no one thought she could meet. The restaurant had grown livelier as the evening moved forward. The soft hum of conversations mixed with the sound of clinking plates and the faint background music that always played in the dining area. Aisha moved from one table to another, her steps quick but graceful, carrying trays filled with steaming food. She was used to the routine, used to the weight of the plates and the polite smile she wore no matter how tired she felt. Yet her attention kept drifting toward the corner table where the group of businessmen sat. They had already finished their main dishes and were now sipping coffee, laughing and talking louder than most guests. Their table seemed brighter, not because of the light above them but because of the energy they carried. Among them, the man who clearly held the highest position, the CEO, commanded the most attention. He had a way of speaking that made the others listen closely, even when he cracked jokes. His suit was sharp, his watch gleamed under the lights, and his confidence filled the room like an invisible wall. Aisha noticed how the younger waiters glanced at him, whispering among themselves. Some admired him, others simply looked at him with curiosity. For them, people like him belonged to another world, a world where luxury cars waited outside and expensive perfumes followed every step. For Aisha, too, he seemed far away, like someone untouchable, almost like a character from one of the books she read in her spare time. She focused on her duties, refilling cups, clearing empty plates, and making sure everything stayed neat. It was during one of her visits to their table that she caught sight of a paper the CEO pulled from his bag. It looked official, covered with neat lines of text written in a language that wasn't English. Aisha's eyes landed on the letters for only a second, but that was enough. Her heart gave a small leap. She recognized the words immediately. She knew that language. She could read it, she could understand it. The CEO noticed his companions eyeing the paper curiously. He smiled, a playful spark in his eyes, and said loudly, "None of you can even read this. It's all in another language." The men chuckled. One of them leaned forward and squinted, as if trying to make sense of the script, but soon shook his head. Another tried guessing what it might mean, but he was completely wrong, and the table burst into laughter. Then the CEO leaned back in his chair, holding the paper up like it was a treasure, and joked, "Tell you what, if anyone here can translate even a line of this, I'll give them my salary for the month." His companions roared with laughter at the bold promise. They knew it was safe. No one at the table understood a word, and certainly none of the waiters in the restaurant would. To them, it was just a joke, something to laugh about over coffee. Aisha was standing close enough to hear the words clearly. For a moment, she froze. Her fingers tightened around the tray she was carrying, and her mind started racing. Translate this? She could. Not just one line, but the entire page if needed. The letters, the grammar, the flow, it was all familiar to her because she had spent countless nights studying exactly this language. But should she speak up? Her heart beat faster as she weighed the thought. She was just a waitress. To them, she was invisible, someone who only existed to bring food and clean up after them. What would they think if she stepped forward? Would they laugh at her, mock her, or dismiss her as a liar? The fear of being embarrassed in front of so many people pulled her back. She could already imagine the sting of their laughter if she made even the smallest mistake. Yet, another voice inside her whispered, "This is your moment." How often does such a chance come? The very skill she had worked on in secret, the talent she had carried like a hidden treasure, was being tested right before her eyes. She could stay silent and let the moment pass, or she could be brave and take a step that might change everything. She stood still for a second, her mind torn between fear and courage. Her heart told her she couldn't let this slip away. She had been waiting for a door to open, and here it was, disguised as a joke. Slowly, she placed the tray on the counter, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked back toward the businessmen's table. Her footsteps felt heavier than usual, but her face carried the same polite calm she always wore. When she reached the table, she lowered her voice politely and said, "Excuse me, sir. May I see the paper?" The laughter at the table died down for a moment. The CEO turned to look at her, clearly surprised. His eyebrows rose as if he hadn't expected anyone, especially not a waitress, to respond to his challenge. He leaned back in his chair, his smile widening in amusement. "You," he asked, half joking. "You think you can translate this?" The other men chuckled, waiting for the scene to play out. Some looked at Aisha with curiosity, others with disbelief. She simply nodded, her expression calm, though inside her heart was racing. "If you don't mind," she said softly. The CEO exchanged a look with his companions, then handed the paper to her with a grin. "Go on then," he said. His tone was playful, but his eyes studied her carefully, as though trying to guess what she would do. Aisha held the paper gently in her hands. For a brief moment, the letters seemed to blur as nervousness washed over her. She took a quiet breath, steadying herself. Then, as her eyes scanned the lines, the words fell into place naturally, as though they had always been waiting for her. She opened her mouth and began to speak. The room around her seemed to grow quieter. The clinking of plates and the chatter of other tables faded in her ears as she translated line after line with confidence. Her voice was steady, her words clear. She didn't stumble, didn't hesitate. She even explained the meaning of a few technical terms, showing not just understanding but mastery. The businessmen at the table sat in silence, their eyes widening as they listened. The playful smile slowly faded into looks of surprise. The CEO leaned forward, his grin gone, replaced by a look of genuine interest. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected her. By the time she finished, the paper lay on the table again, and Aisha stood there quietly, her hands folded in front of her. She didn't boast, didn't smile with pride. She had simply done what she knew she could. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was heavy, filled with disbelief. Then one of the men let out a low whistle. Another muttered, "Unbelievable." Finally, The CEO laughed, not the same playful laugh as before, but a deeper one, filled with admiration. He looked at Aisha with new eyes, no longer seeing just a waitress in an apron. He saw something else, something unexpected. And in that moment, Aisha realized she had taken the boldest step of her life. Aisha's heart was still pounding as she lowered the paper onto the table. She could feel every pair of eyes fixed on her, and for a brief second she wondered if she had made a mistake by stepping forward. But as she looked at the men's faces, she saw something that surprised her. The laughter that had once filled their eyes was gone. What replaced it was shock, curiosity, and even respect. The CEO leaned closer, his elbows resting on the table, his sharp eyes locked onto hers. He was no longer smiling out of amusement, instead, there was a seriousness in his expression, as if he was rethinking everything he had assumed about her. For the first time since she had started working in the restaurant, Aisha felt like she wasn't invisible. They weren't looking at her as just a waitress anymore. They were seeing her as someone different, someone capable. The moment stretched, heavy with silence, until one of the businessmen broke it with a laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. "She did it," he said, almost to himself. Another one leaned back in his chair and muttered, "Unbelievable. I didn't expect this." Their voices carried a mixture of surprise and admiration, but it was the CEO's reaction that mattered most. He sat back in his chair, his smile returning, but in a different way this time. It wasn't playful or mocking, it was impressed. "Where did you learn that?" he asked, his voice calm yet curious. His question was simple, but it carried weight. Aisha's hands tightened slightly against her apron. For a moment, she hesitated, unsure how much she should say. She wasn't used to people being interested in her story. But the sincerity in his eyes encouraged her to answer. "I studied on my own," she said softly. "I love languages. I practiced whenever I could, with books, videos, anything I could find." The table went quiet again. The men exchanged glances, clearly surprised by her answer. Self-study. No teacher, no classes, and yet she could translate a professional document so fluently. It was not just unusual, it was extraordinary. One of them leaned forward, smiling in disbelief. "You're telling me you taught yourself this? No formal training at all?" Aisha nodded modestly. "Yes, sir." The CEO studied her for a long moment, his fingers tapping lightly against the table. He looked at the paper again, then back at her, as though trying to piece together how someone like her could carry such talent. "Do you know what this document is about?" he asked, his tone testing her further. She took a breath, recalling the lines she had just read. "It's about an agreement," she explained calmly. "It discusses business terms, conditions of partnership, financial shares, and deadlines. It's written formally, but it's clear." She went on to explain a few details, pointing out the way certain phrases were structured and even offering the equivalent terms in English that a business professional might use. The CEO's eyes widened slightly at her precision. The men at the table leaned back, exchanging surprised looks. They had been joking only moments ago, but now they were listening to her as if she were part of the discussion. For Aisha, it was a strange, almost unreal feeling. She had spent years being ignored, her words limited to "what would you like to order," or "would you like more tea?" Now, for the first time, her knowledge was being taken seriously. The CEO chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I must admit," he said, "I underestimated you. You've surprised us all." His tone was no longer mocking but respectful. He gestured toward her apron with a thoughtful look. "And all this time, you've been working here, serving tables?" Aisha lowered her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the question. "Yes," she admitted. "I needed to help my family. This job was what I could find." The CEO leaned back in his chair, studying her again. "And yet, You carry skills that many graduates would envy. He paused, his voice carrying a mix of admiration and disbelief. Tell me, how many languages do you know? She hesitated, then answered honestly. I can speak and understand 5. I'm still learning more. The men at the table were stunned. One of them let out a low whistle. 5, he repeated. That's impressive. Another shook his head, muttering, and here we thought we were the educated ones at the table. They laughed lightly, but the laughter was different now, gentle, respectful, not mocking. Aisha stood quietly, unsure of what else to say. She had never been the center of attention like this before, and part of her still wondered if she had crossed a line by stepping forward. But another part of her felt proud, as though all those nights of studying in silence had finally found a purpose. The CEO looked around the table, then back at her. You know, he said slowly, if I were a man of my word, I'd have to give you my salary right now. The table erupted in laughter again, but this time it wasn't at her expense. It was light-hearted, warm, almost celebratory. Even Aisha found herself smiling slightly, though she knew he didn't mean it literally. Still, there was something in his voice, something unspoken, that hinted this was more than just a passing joke. He was impressed, and when men like him were impressed, opportunities often followed. Aisha excused herself politely, placing the paper back on the table. Thank you for letting me try, she said softly, her voice steady even though her heart was still racing. She turned to leave, but she could feel their eyes following her as she walked back to the counter. For the rest of the evening, the group's laughter and conversation carried a different tone. They still joked and discussed business, but now and then, their eyes flicked toward her, as if they couldn't quite forget the waitress who had surprised them all. As Aisha continued serving other tables, she replayed the moment again and again in her mind. The fear, the courage, the translation, the silence that followed every second felt etched into her memory. She didn't know what would come of it, but she knew one thing, she had taken a bold step. For once, she hadn't let fear silence her. The CEO and his companions stayed longer than most customers. When they finally stood up to leave, the CEO glanced at her one last time. He gave her a small nod, the kind of nod that carried meaning, the kind that said, I see you now. It wasn't money, it wasn't a grand reward, but to Aisha, it meant everything. In that nod, she felt the recognition she had always dreamed of. It was proof that her efforts had not been wasted, that her hidden skill had finally shone through the ordinary walls of the restaurant. What she didn't realize then was that this moment, the simple act of translating a document at the right time, was only the beginning of a much larger change in her life. The restaurant felt quieter after the group of businessmen left, even though the usual noise of customers and clinking dishes still filled the air. For Aisha, however, everything felt different. Her heart was still beating fast from what had just happened. She had spoken up, done something she never thought she could, and for the first time in a long while, she had been seen for who she truly was. The memory of the CEO's nod lingered in her mind. It wasn't just a small gesture, it was recognition, and that meant more to her than she could put into words. She tried to focus on her work again, clearing tables, delivering orders, smiling at customers. But her mind kept drifting back to the moment when she stood in front of the businessmen, translating with confidence. The silence that followed, the looks on their faces, the respect in their voices, it all replayed in her head like a scene from a film. She wondered if that was the peak of her hidden journey, or if something greater was still waiting for her. The night passed, and eventually, her shift ended. She walked home along the quiet streets, her small bag slung over her shoulder. The city lights glowed around her, and she could still hear faint echoes of laughter from nearby cafes and shops. She thought about telling her mother what had happened, but then stopped. Would her mother believe her? Would she understand how much courage it had taken to step forward in that moment? Aisha decided to keep it to herself for now, holding the memory close like a secret treasure. The next day, she returned to the restaurant as usual, expecting nothing more than another long shift of serving tables. But as soon as she walked through the door, she noticed something unusual. Her manager, who usually barely looked at her except to give instructions, was watching her with a curious expression. He gave a small nod and said, "You impressed some important people last night." His tone wasn't harsh, it carried a strange respect. Aisha felt her cheeks warm, but she only smiled politely and went about her work. Later that evening, when the restaurant was less crowded, she noticed a man walk in alone. He wasn't a customer she recognized, but there was something familiar about his face. He looked around, spotted her, and smiled. As he approached, Aisha realized he had been one of the men sitting at the businessmen's table the night before. He greeted her politely and said, "The CEO asked me to give you this." He handed her a simple white envelope. Her hands trembled slightly as she accepted it. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet. She didn't open it immediately, instead, she slipped it into her apron pocket and continued with her duties. Her heart, however, wouldn't calm down. The envelope felt heavy, as though it carried more than just paper. When her shift ended and she finally had a moment alone, she sat down at a small corner table and carefully opened it. Inside was a note written in neat handwriting. It read, "You have a rare talent. I admire your courage and your dedication. If you are interested, I would like to meet you tomorrow to discuss an opportunity. Come to the office at the address below. M. Raman." Her breath caught as she read the words again and again. An opportunity. The CEO himself wanted to see her. She felt her eyes sting with tears, not of sadness but of disbelief. All those nights of studying, all the times she had doubted herself, all the struggles of working while dreaming of something more, it was as if everything had led to this moment. The next day, Aisha found herself standing in front of a tall glass building in the city center, far different from the narrow streets and small shops she was used to. The building seemed to stretch into the sky, its walls reflecting the sunlight. People in formal clothes walked in and out with purpose, carrying briefcases and files. Aisha clutched her small bag tightly, feeling out of place in her simple clothes, but reminding herself that she had been invited here for her skill, not her appearance. When she walked into the lobby, she felt her heart race again. The receptionist looked at her kindly and, after checking the note she showed, guided her to the CEO's office on one of the upper floors. The elevator ride felt endless, her reflection staring back at her in the glass walls, nervous but determined. When the doors opened, she was greeted by the CEO's assistant, who led her into a spacious office. It was elegant, with large windows overlooking the city, shelves filled with books, and a polished desk at the center. And there he was, the same man who had once laughed at his own joke, now standing to welcome her with a warm smile. "Aisha," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I'm glad you came." She sat carefully on the chair opposite him, her hands folded in her lap. "Thank you for inviting me, sir," she replied softly. He leaned forward, studying her with interest. "Last night, you surprised me, and not just me, but everyone at the table. You showed skill, confidence, and intelligence. I must admit, I didn't expect to find that in a restaurant waitress." He paused, then smiled. "But life has a way of hiding gems in unexpected places." Aisha listened quietly, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and nervousness. "I want to give you an opportunity," he continued. "We have a position open in our company for someone who can assist with translations, communications, and international clients. Your knowledge of languages could be extremely valuable to us. It won't be easy, it will require hard work, professionalism, and continued learning. But if you're willing, I'd like you to join us." For a moment, Aisha could hardly breathe. The words sounded unreal, like something from her daydreams. She thought of the long nights with her notebooks, the times she had whispered foreign words to herself while everyone else slept, the moments she had almost given up. And now, here was the chance she had been waiting for, offered by the very person who had once laughed at the idea of anyone translating his paper. "Sir," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly, "I would be honored." The CEO smiled, clearly pleased by her sincerity. "Good. Then we'll start the paperwork. But before that, tell me honestly what made you step forward last night?" Most people would have stayed silent. Aisha thought for a moment, then answered with honesty. "I was afraid. But I realized if I let fear stop me, I would lose a chance that might never come again. So I decided to be brave, even if it was just for a moment." The CEO nodded slowly, as if her words confirmed something he already believed. "Courage," he said. "That's as important as knowledge." The meeting ended with a handshake that felt like the beginning of a new chapter in Aisha's life. She walked out of the office building with her heart full of hope, her steps lighter than they had ever been. The streets of the city looked different now, not as obstacles but as paths leading her toward a future she had only dreamed about before. She returned home that evening with a smile she couldn't hide. For once, she allowed herself to share the news with her mother. Tears of joy filled her mother's eyes as she hugged Aisha tightly, whispering, "I knew you were meant for something greater." Aisha realized then that her life had truly begun to change. What had started as a simple joke in a restaurant had turned into an opportunity that could transform her future. And deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. The weeks that followed felt like a dream to Aisha. One day she was carrying trays in a noisy restaurant, and the next, she was walking into an office building where people wore suits and greeted each other with respect. At first, it felt strange to her. She wasn't used to the polished floors, the bright lights, or the constant sound of phones ringing and keyboards clicking. She often wondered if she truly belonged there. But every time she sat down with a document or helped someone translate a conversation, she reminded herself that she had earned her place. Her first tasks were small. The CEO asked her to review short emails written in other languages, making sure the meaning was correct before they were sent out. She worked carefully, checking every word with the precision she had developed from her years of practice. Her dedication showed quickly, and soon she was trusted with bigger responsibilities, translating contracts, interpreting meetings, and helping clients from other countries feel welcome. Her colleagues were surprised at first. They couldn't understand how a young woman with no formal training could perform so well. But as they watched her work day after day, their doubt turned into respect. Some even began to ask her for advice, and Aisha, though shy at first, slowly grew comfortable in her new role. The CEO himself often checked on her progress. He would stop by her desk, asking how she was adjusting, and he always listened carefully when she spoke. Unlike many others in positions of power, he didn't treat her like she was beneath him. Instead, he treated her as someone valuable to the team. That small gesture meant more to Aisha than any amount of money. It reminded her that her hard work was being seen, that her worth was finally recognized. Back at home, life also began to change. With her new salary, she was able to support her family more comfortably. Her mother no longer had to stay up late sewing clothes for extra income. Her younger brother's school fees were paid on time, and he no longer had to worry about dropping out. The small house where they lived started to feel lighter, filled with hope instead of constant worry. Every time Aisha handed her mother her share of the earnings, she felt a quiet pride that warmed her heart. But more than the money, it was the way her family looked at her that mattered most. Her mother's eyes glowed with pride whenever she introduced Aisha to relatives. Her younger brother told his friends that his sister worked in a big office and could speak to people from all over the world. Even her father, who rarely spoke much, once placed his hand gently on her shoulder and said, "You've done more than I could ever dream of, my child." Those words stayed with her forever. As weeks turned into months, Aisha grew into her new role with confidence. She wasn't the shy waitress anymore, she was a professional, respected for her skills. She often thought back to the night in the restaurant when she had almost kept silent. What if she had walked away and ignored the CEO's challenge? What if fear had won? She realized that sometimes, one small decision could change the direction of an entire life. One afternoon, the CEO called her into his office. She walked in, curious but calm, and found him standing by the window, looking out over the city. He turned when she entered, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Aisha," he said, "do you know why I offered you this position?" She hesitated, unsure how to answer. "Because I translated the paper," she asked softly. He smiled. "That was part of it. But more than that, it was your courage. Many people have skills, but very few have the bravery to show them when it matters. You stepped forward when no one else did. That is what caught my attention." Aisha listened quietly, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I want you to remember something," he continued. "Life will test you again and again. Opportunities may come disguised as jokes, as problems, even as accidents. What matters is whether you recognize them and have the courage to act. You did that once, and it changed everything. Never forget what you are capable of." His words stayed with her long after she left his office. She repeated them to herself during late evenings when she studied new languages, pushing herself to improve. They became a reminder that her journey was far from over, that this was only the beginning of what she could achieve. As time passed, Aisha became more than just an assistant. She was promoted to a role where she directly worked with international clients, attending important meetings and sometimes even traveling to represent the company. Each new experience taught her more, not just about languages, but about confidence, responsibility, and leadership. Her story began to spread among her colleagues. New employees often whispered about the girl who had once been a waitress and was now an essential part of the company. Some called her story inspiring, others called it unbelievable. Aisha, however, remained humble. She knew that every step had been the result of hard work, sacrifice, and a moment of bravery. One day, while walking home after a long meeting, she passed by the restaurant where it had all begun. She stopped for a moment, looking through the glass at the familiar tables, the waiters rushing around, the soft glow of lights. It felt strange to see it again, knowing how different her life had become since that evening. For a while, she simply stood there, remembering the girl she had been, the girl who wiped tables quietly, carrying a secret dream in her heart. She whispered a quiet thank you to herself, to her younger self who had dared to step forward when it mattered most. Her journey had taught her something priceless: people may underestimate you, they may laugh or dismiss you, but what truly defines your life is the moment you choose to believe in yourself. Courage, even for a few seconds, can open doors that lead to an entirely new world. Years later, when she looked back at her story, Aisha never remembered it as the night the CEO left. Instead, she remembered it as the night she stopped being invisible, the night she proved to herself that she was worth more than the world had given her credit for. It was the night her real life began.